Pediatricians often will recommend up to age 5, less than an hour of screen time a day. But let's say you do have a 4 or 5-year-old and you are working a couple of hours in the day. Is it the end of the world if you give them a couple of hours? As a child psychologist, I'm going to say no. You, as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself too. You have to take care of your family by working. Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
Good morning, Andrew.
Hey, Dave. Happy Canada Day long weekend coming up.
Yeah, and the end of school. So I know at least here in Alberta, my kids were done a couple of days ago. So it's a new phase of of the season that we're in.
Well, it's Friday when we're recording, and in Ontario, the last day for kids is actually today. So they went all the way till the Friday. And it's actually a very timely episode today because with kids going off onto summer break, it's going to be a change. It's going to be a change for parents. It's going to be a change for the children, depending on what everyone has planned. Could be vacations, summer camps. And for a lot of families, it's also nothing. Parents who can stay at home with their kids may just want to hang out. And for some children, it's quite a transition to have to do that. For some parents, it's quite a transition to have to do that. So with today's episode, I think we're going to try and tackle the subject of summertime routines, screen time, structure, boredom, right? And we'll try to hit as many as we can with the time that we have.
Well, I was looking forward to just grabbing a coffee and chatting with you about this because, like I said, I can learn something from you when we have these conversations. I know you work with a lot of kids at your office, and that also means working with parents. And, even just for the listeners, check out for yourself. How do you do with change, right? Is it something you welcome and look forward to, or is it something that tends to be hard for you? And then also, if you do have children, how do your children do with change? That'll just kind of start us off because it's a big change. School is done for the kids.
Well, and as much as we could focus on the kids too, I mean, we could go on for a whole hour talking about routines and changes for kids. I think a really important piece that I often see in my office too is having the parents needing to adapt. And it's not just with summertime, it's with all sorts of other things too. When change occurs, even as adults, some of us do really well being flexible and adaptive. Whereas others, we need more time to adapt to that change. We have to really flush out what we're used to, get into a different frame of mind in order to try something different, try something new.
Yeah, there's an author and a researcher, Daniel Siegel. He's written a ton of books, but he's got this metaphor that I've always remembered. It's a river, and on the one side of the river, one bank is rigidity, and so really kind of not much changing. And then the other side, it can be chaos, right?
Yep.
So much change that it's chaotic. And so how do you find kind of your space on that river to avoid being totally rigid or totally chaotic that works well for you and your family?
Yep. Using that river analogy, actually, I like it because then I sort of envision, as we're talking about rigidity and flexibility, it's not a black and white kind of definition, right? You have some people who are perhaps very rigid. You may have some people who are maybe overly flexible, but then you have all the children and adults in between. So it's sort of like building this bridge to see where we land that's comfortable for everybody within our system, within our ecosystem. At the same time, though, in order to build this bridge, you have to be prepared, right? So as we go into this transition of summertime, how do we prepare our household, our frame of mind, and our children for this change? And it's being able to find the right resources, planning, being proactive. So, for example, like I said, today we're recording on a Friday. Technically, come Monday, every child parent knows, okay, there's no school, right? So you may have a few days to prepare and think about what is that going to look like and how are we going to set it up for success?
Yeah, I was actually so because our kids ended on Wednesday and we're Friday here. Last night there was a community event after my son's soccer, and we had planned this so that we'd have a babysitter at our place, so that when we came home, we'd get the kids ready for bed like their normal routine at the same time that they typically kind of go to sleep,
Hmm.
and then have the babysitter at our place while we went to this community event that was going on till about like 10 o'clock. But going there and looking around and seeing all these kids that are, in my boys' class and soccer team, and I'm like, oh man, like I get it. They're gonna have a later bedtime tonight because there is no school. They don't have to be at school at a certain time,
Mm.
right? And so as parents, kind of figuring out what's best for your kids, like are they able to stay up later and then sleep in the next day? Or will that throw them off and you're going to be dealing with like behaviors and temper tantrums all weekend long because they stayed up an extra 2 hours later?
Yeah. And with whatever changes families decide to do, know that there could be a little bit of tantruming, a little bit of more challenging behaviors before a child gets used to the new routine. So if the family is saying, you know what, yeah, we're not going to go to bed as early, we'll have everybody stay up a little bit later, is that child going to get a little bit more overtired? And does that mean just before bedtime, they might have a bit of meltdown? Does that also mean that they're going to wake up at the same time the next morning, the regular school time, and so they're going to be a little bit more tired than usual? And is that going to lead to, again, some challenging behaviors throughout the day, right? So, in whatever we do, we have to think about, okay, what are the pros and cons of this? And are we open to working with those challenges should they come?
Yeah, and so maybe let's dive into the screen time. Typically, with more free time, there could be more screen time, right? And there's a lot of talk about this for quite some time now. But parents are often asking, like, what is the appropriate amount of time? How do we do this? Like, when should our kids be on their screens? What types of screens? What do you see at your office?
So it's so different from family to family, even child to child. But I think screens are very stimulating. And so, in terms of even recommending the number of hours of screen time, I will often say, if we can limit it on the weekdays, especially during school days, to about an hour a night for younger children, and setting limitations. And to me, I always ask parents, what are you comfortable with? The doctors and professionals, they can all say, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. But at the end of the day, what are you as a parent comfortable with? And what's feasible too, right? So if you are, let's say, working from home and your child comes home from school at 3:30 and your workday doesn't end till 6 or 5:30, right? Is the screen sort of your go-to method or tool so that you can continue working, right? And some parents have to do that. To me, like if that is the piece that is going to help get you through your workday, then so be it, right? Everybody has their circumstances, perhaps where you can't find a babysitter, maybe in the area there's no aftercare after school, right? So even for summertime, if this means, some parents may have flexible work schedules and so they have to work a couple of hours every morning, can we provide our children with the screen in the morning in order for you to get through your couple of hours of the workday, right? If that's the case, and that's the best method that's going to keep things quiet at home, then we have to roll with that.
Yeah, and if we remember that, as a general rule, less screen time is probably better for most kids, right? So just be conscious of what are the consequences of more screen time. And I often think about screen time as if your kid is on their screen, what are they not doing, right? What
Yes.
other activities or opportunities or enrichment kind of things that they could be doing that they're not? So, whether that's getting out in nature, exercising, moving their body, socializing with other peers, or even good parent-child activities and time together, quality time, interacting together. So,
Well, I think that's why this is so individualistic and really depends on the family and what can be scheduled in. So when I say like, look, if you have to provide a couple of hours of screen time to get through your work, it doesn't mean that once you're finished your work, you're going to keep the child on the screen, right? So to your point, Dave, it's like, okay, if we structure so we tell our children, okay, mom, dad, we have to work a couple of hours from 9 to 11 this morning, right? So you get that screen time, but here's what the schedule looks like. After 11 o'clock, we're going to turn off the screens and we're going to go outside for a walk, or we're going to go out to the park, right? Or we're going to go down to the lake, whatever it is. But it's setting them up so that maybe the night before, the morning of, it's showing them perhaps even a visual schedule of what the day's going to look like, right? This is part of that building that bridge across that river. It's like, okay, let's get prepared so that our kids aren't all of a sudden shell shocked after a couple of hours of screen time, and it's like, okay, guys, screens away, we're gonna go outside, and they love the screen, so they're like, no, we don't want to leave. If we prepare them ahead of time to know, okay, again, developmentally it's so different. If they can read a clock, if they can't, but if you say, okay, after this amount of time we're gonna go outside, right? Screens are done for the day. This is what we have planned for the rest of the day. That to me is really important.
yeah, I think like you're saying, the transitions. So for some kids more than others, but I know my little guys at home really struggle with those transitions.
Hmm.
So whether it's going from outside to inside, whether it's going from, eating breakfast to brushing teeth, like, and screens can be one of the hardest, right? They're fully engaged, and if you walk up and rip the screen out of their hand because they're done their time, you can expect a meltdown. Like that is just, it's going to be really hard for them. So, like you said, giving warning, knowing that the time is coming up. We often have like timers that will make a sound, so they're cued that way, and then I'll count to five, right?
Yep.
So I'll give 5 seconds to make that shift where I'm actually removing the screen from them, whether they're done their game or not, right? They need to find where the pause button is, and then we're going to do something else. And it still is not always easy.
Yep.
Um, and that's why when we talk about structure and routine that gets disrupted, structure and routine actually helps minimize the challenges that come with those transitions because the child is used to them. They just
Yep.
know when the bell rings, they come back inside from their recess. They know that
Hmm.
they line up. They know that this is how the day generally rolls out. So you'll have less challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. This is where I think, many teachers do a good job, especially elementary school teachers with schedule and putting it up on the board, warning kids if there are any changes to the schedule. And if we can mimic that at home, it can really help with transitions and structuring the routine so kids know what to expect as the days and the weeks go. Speaking of structure, I know I was using the example of screen time in the morning. In the ideal world, I would love for kids to not have screen time in the mornings. When we first wake up, usually this is when we're fresh, our brains are ready to go. And, if there are other things that can be done, whether it is perhaps some reading time or going out for a nature walk, um, if at home you wanted your kids to continue doing a little bit of academics during the summer, I would say that that's the time to do it. And then we can sprinkle in the screens as children are finishing up these tasks and routines.
When screen time is used, all of these things. And I think this brings up a, a bit of a personal experience. And I think you shared the same thing when we were talking about even this subject before we started recording. If you have two parents in the house, if you have even other caregivers or adults, right? Like this needs to be a discussion in terms of getting on some kind of an agreement so that the children know what the expectations are, what the routine might be, right? So if one parent says, I don't really care, here's my phone, and the other parent is saying, really strictly that 1 hour a day, that's the maximum.
Yep.
So you're going to have conflict between the parents or the caregivers that is
Yep.
not going to be helpful. So having these discussions before you're in the heat of the moment or like on that car trip or on that, summer vacation, this hopefully this podcast might actually help spur that conversation.
Well, children are savvy, and I'm sure many parents experience this where, your child may go to one parent, ask for something, they don't get it. So they go to the other parent, right? I think it's actually a very natural process for kids to want to do that, right? They're just trying to get their way, and that's okay, right? They're seeking out ways of getting what they want. It's actually a very adaptive characteristic, but I think this is where when if there is inconsistent parenting, it can be very confusing for the parent, but also it can be not necessarily confusing for the child, a little bit though, because then they're like, okay, let's try every time. Go to one parent, go to the other. Am I going to get it this time? Am I not? It's sort of like that casino analogy, right? Like, why do we sit at the table for so long? We're looking for some kind of payout, but we don't know when it's going to come. So then you have children who's going to ask all these different people for permission for something, and sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. And so they're going to try, and sometimes if they never get it, then they have a meltdown.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, like you said, kids are smart and their job is to test the boundaries and to figure out how they can get what they want. And, if you're at a restaurant with some friends that you haven't seen in a while and the kids are, disrupting the conversation and you say, okay, here's my phone, they're going to learn that like maybe the next time mom and dad or parents are with other people,
Yep,
that's the time to ask for the phone or that's the time to get it when we're at a restaurant. So my rule, like for myself, is don't do it once if you're not going to do it again. Like just not
exactly.
that I can always live up to that, but just
Yep.
knowing that it's going to train my child to actually ask for that or do that same behavior again because they got rewarded, right? And
Yes.
that's yeah.
Yep. And that's the piece around, even sometimes as parents, we don't recognize that we rewarded them for something that perhaps was not the best behavior or what we expect, right? So as a child is starting to throw a tantrum at a restaurant because they're bored, they don't know what to do, you go, here's the screen. They just got rewarded for screaming and yelling,
Yeah.
right? And so the next time they go, oh, well, that worked. Well, I'm going to try it again and
Hmm.
again and again, right? And so we may not even recognize that that's a reward, but it is, right? And so sometimes when families get into that pattern, I always warn, if we're going to try and break that pattern, you have to be prepared for some perhaps epic meltdowns, right? So as we're going to change that behavior and we say, you know what? No, you're not getting the screen for doing this,
Hmm.
right? In order to get the screen, you have to perhaps do this or do that in a more adaptive way, go take a bath or, read a book first. And as we're trying to change the routine and the quote unquote rules at home, you're going to get that what we call that sort of extinction burst, right? Where the
Yeah, the
child
the
is
pushback.
the pushback. Yep. And it can be epic
Yeah.
because it's worked so many times for them. And this time it's not working and they're wondering why, right? But as caregivers, we have to really put our foot down and we have to weather that storm. I usually use the analogy of an anchor, right? On a boat, we throw down the anchor, even if the waves are throwing us around on the surface. If we have supports from partners, from other people to say, you know what, you're doing a good job, keep going as parents, that anchor is going to keep us in place, right? We just have
Yeah.
to weather the storm for a few days.
Yeah, and the storm could be big, right?
Yes.
And unfortunately, like, a lot of empathy and compassion to parents out there, right? Like life is hard and there are times where you're stressed or there are times where you haven't slept or those kind of weak moments where we just can't deal with the struggle. But knowing that like if I give in this one time because I just can't deal with the meltdown, I'm gonna probably have to deal with 10 meltdowns after, right? Just to in a psychological kind of jargon to extinguish
Yep.
that behavior, right? And we know that if it's inconsistent, it reinforces that behavior even stronger, right? So you might, if your kids are old enough to talk to them, you say, hey, this is the exception. This is why the exception is happening. And this is how it's not going to happen again. And they can understand that, then likely that might help them. But again, when summertime routine changes, when things are changing, friends are over, classmates are over, does the bedtime change? Does bath time change? How do kids understand these changes in a way that again, doesn't disrupt the whole family because you
Yep.
still got to get to work at your regular time.
Well, that's why I think structure is so important, in letting the kids know what activities are we going to do today. And not every single activity is going to be stimulating. Not every activity is going to be enjoyed. As caregivers, we have to take care of ourselves as well. We can't run ourselves ragged, the first week of summer vacation because we've done so many stimulating things and we've run around to 20 different places all day. We've gone to the store to get this and get that in order for our kids to have fun and stay quote unquote happy. Sometimes we just need downtime. And maybe that does mean just reading a book. If your child doesn't love reading a book, you know, but maybe we can schedule that in. It's okay for our kids to be bored.
I love these discussions. I'm just like going through my head all the mistakes that I've made in just the past week. I think one of them that comes to mind right now is my wife and I will plan out the day, right? We'll plan out our Saturday or our Sunday, but we haven't told the kids, right? And we just kind of like expect that, okay, it's time to go here, it's time to do this. And they don't want to do it. And so sometimes they'll say, well, I'm not going. And then it's like, well, how do we get them in the vehicle for this thing? And so I like what you're saying is not only have a good, clear plan as parents, as adults, but also communicating this to the kids so they know what's coming up and even having like get visual pictures of the things that they're going to do so they can understand.
It's so funny, Dave. Like, as you're talking about your personal experiences, I've had parents tell me, "Oh, you know what, Andrew, your household must be so calm and relaxed." And I laugh because nobody's perfect, not even close, right? So as I tell these things to parents, yeah, we try to implement these things at home, but is it going to be like 365 days of the year? It's like there's no way, right? Things come up, plans change. There are days when my wife and I are more organized than other days. There are days when we'll be like, okay, let's put things on a whiteboard. We have a little whiteboard, right? Let's schedule out things and what we're going to be doing. And, our kids luckily like doing that and they'll write things out and cross it out as we do them. And those days are easier, right? But do we have the energy every time to break out the whiteboard and say, plan out every single thing? No. Right. So, you said mistakes. I don't really see them as mistakes. I just see them as learning opportunities. And look, it's life. Life gets busy, you know.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the benefits of doing this job is that, I've seen the research and there's a phrase called the good enough parent, right?
Yep.
And actually, surprisingly, the bar is pretty low. So, you know, you can make some mistakes or, do some things that you're not proud of or that you don't think are really great for your kids or for your family. But as long as you have that kind of enough structure and routine and
Yep.
enough love in the home, your kids will be okay. Sure, doing better will probably be better for them, but in terms of the actual impact on kids,
Yep.
going from good enough to excellent or superb doesn't have as much of an impact as we might put the pressure on us as parents to do.
There's no perfection, right? There's no perfection in parenting. And I think sometimes I hear from parents, that they feel like they have to entertain their children all the time. And so then at the same time, they're sort of conflicted. Oh, screens, screens are bad. And to your point earlier, yeah, we want to limit their screen time, depending on what our schedules look like and what's going to help us get through the day. But I also say like boredom's okay. Boredom gives our children an opportunity to hopefully get creative. And when I say, let them be bored, I don't mean like let them just give them nothing to do and just sprawl on the floor and let them figure it out. No. I have another analogy for that. It's sort of like telling your child to learn how to tie a shoelace. Just throw them a shoe and go here, figure it out. That's not what I mean, right? Because we can leave them with that shoelace for hours and they're not going to figure it out. But I think as parents, we can control the situation by saying, you know what? We've got a few things here today. A couple of things that you can do right now for the next 30 minutes, right? You can either do this, this, or this, right? And it's still structured in the way, whereas adults, we've structured it. We can say, here's a puzzle, here's some coloring books, here's some Lego, right? Take your pick. And it's showing them that, okay, you've got limits here of what you can do. We're not going to go to the screen every time, but here are a few options, that I've structured for you and you can choose.
Yeah, you actually bring up like you can structure unstructured time, right?
Exactly.
So you can have a time block where you say, we're going outside. We're going to walk in the river valley. I don't know what we're going to do, right? We're going to use creativity. We're going to use, we just, that's where the screens, they're really not unstructured time, right?
Yeah.
These programmers that have created these games, like it is, there's an intent and there's a focus and the child actually doesn't need to use, well, some games more than others, but not often needs to use like social skills or creativity or
Yeah.
so having unstructured free time can be extremely important for the development of children.
And I always tell parents too, we can make the structured time look like that the child is in control, right? This idea of giving them three choices, right?
Hmm.
Really, at the end of the day, that is in your control as the parent. You're the one who came up with the three choices. But guess who's making the choice? The child, right? So there's perceived control from the child that, oh, I get to choose. This is great. Okay?
Hmm.
So same with outside time, right? Like we can go for a walk. Oh, or you can take your bike or scooter, right?
Hmm.
So it looks like you're sweetening the deal, but you as a parent, you're saying, yeah, I'm fine with whether they walk, they run, they scooter, they bike. I'm cool with any one of those. But the child goes, oh, I get a choice. This is great, right? So then everybody's sort of happy here.
Yeah, so and then going back to screen time and some of the strategies or helpful tips, one of them is just what kind of role modeling are you doing as a parent with your own screens, right?
Yeah.
With your phone, with the TV? Is it something that's playing in the background all the time, or is it something when you're with your child that you're checking your emails or scrolling your news feeds,
Yeah.
right? Because they're picking up on that too, right? They're looking
Yeah.
at you and going, "Hey, how come you can do that?"
Yeah. So making sure if we don't want our children asking for screens at, let's say, dinner time, sometimes monitoring, hey, am I using my phone or a screen at dinner time? Um, we should perhaps put it away and foster some conversation at dinner. And those are things that we have to be cognizant of, right? I think, 99% of North America nowadays has a screen of some sort, right? And it's so easy to just pull out of our pocket when we're waiting in line.
Or,
Sometimes, sorry, go
or
ahead.
it's on our wrist,
Or
right?
it's on our
Like,
wrist. That's right. That's right.
or these glasses that are coming out now that you could just be wearing glasses that have, yeah.
Yeah. And I've had parents tell me they're teenagers, They're studying on their computer at the same time they've got Netflix on their phone next to the computer screen. They're trying to study with Netflix going on. And so this is where again it's really limiting and putting our foot down at times. Like if you're going to study, you're not going to have your phone next to you watching a show on Netflix, right? Or you're not chatting with a friend where every 5 seconds you're messaging because then really how much studying are you doing? So again, it's like setting out these expectations at home early so that kids know, okay, this is not the time for me to use my phone. I know what my mom and dad are going to say, or I know what my caregiver is going to say if I pull out my phone in this moment. And we can't contradict ourselves either, right? Like if if we're going to say these things to our kids, it's also important for us to put our phone far away from the dinner table if we don't want screens at the dinner table, right? Or if we are doing some work in front of our kids, it is important to then not have our own shows playing on the side as we're working, right? Because you're inevitably going to get that question, well, why can you do it and I can't?
Yeah, and I think we're gonna talk about this at some point, but like attachment and the way children learn that they're important and that like they're seen and heard and understood, it's really hard to do that when we're distracted, right? So as a parent, if we got one eye on a screen and another eye on the child, and it really is important that we give them some undivided attention throughout the day. It doesn't have to be all the time, but it like for again, for child development, they
Yeah.
are soaking that up and trying to get a sense of who they are by looking at you.
It's so important to model healthy screen time. I have middle schoolers, high schoolers saying, "Oh, my parents won't let me be on the screen," but every other moment I look at them, they're on the screen. Like they're hypocrites, right? And so kids see these things and they do point it out. So in terms of modeling that healthy screen time, if we're going to say to our kids, "Hey, you can't have more than an hour of screen time tonight," and that's every weeknight, are they seeing you also having less than an hour of screen time each night?
And if you have different rules for different age categories or right, like
Yeah,
the it has to be explained. But again, the younger the child, the harder it is to understand this, right?
yeah,
And so I think, like you said, the example of this dinner table, all the phones, all the screens get, put in a basket on, the island, and then we eat together, and
yeah,
then we might have some time on our screens, but intentionally even using that as like a teachable moment,
yeah.
right? You
And
might even pretend to have your own outbursts when you have to
yeah.
put your screen away.
Yeah, and I think this is why screens, like in my office, when I am working with parents and I'm working with children or teenagers, I still use screens as a privilege. It's not a right. So, as we go through our day, to me, as we're growing, it's so important to be responsible, learn life skills, do your homework, even if you don't like it. These are things that will serve us well as adults, right? Do the laundry, learn how to do dishes, learn how to
Mhm.
cook a meal as you're getting older. Just because your parents are cooking your meals for you doesn't mean you're upstairs just being on your phone and playing video games. Go downstairs and help. Like to me, those are really productive life skills to have. And so I will often say, like after school or even during the summer, have a list of things that your child, again, depending on their age, that they are expected to do before they get their screens. Perhaps not every parent or caregiver will agree with me, but this is what I've found that's worked. And again, it's if that's not the usual practice, you will get pushback. But we have to get used to that structure so that they learn that, oh, screen time is a reward, right? It's because I finished all of these things first, and now I get the screen.
Yeah, and you're talking about it. It's a bit of that behavioral aspect from psychology, working with kids. And one of the phrases that I've stuck with me, it's like, what is your kid's currency, right? So what gets them motivated? What are they interested in? And how can we have that as a way to get them maybe more motivated to do things they're not totally interested in, right? But that are good life skills. So you really want to play your screen time. All right, you got to finish your breakfast and you got to brush your teeth and you got to get dressed and ready for school. And then if you do that quickly, you get some time on your screen before we go to school.
Yep. Speaking of currency, what I'll also do too, and I think we will have a future episode in terms of talking about behavioral therapy, but even banking some of that screen time, right? So as you talk about morning time, you have to brush your teeth, get changed, eat breakfast, get your backpack ready. You do those four things, and we'll put a check mark on the board, and that check mark represents, I don't know, 15 minutes of screen time, right? After school, this is what you need to do. Take out your lunchbox, put away your shoes, wash your hands, finish your homework. You do those four things again, another 15 minutes banked, right? So that once you finish those things, then after your supper and before bedtime, you can get 30 minutes of screen time.
Oh man, we could talk about like there's different approaches to this, but I know this is bringing up a lot from home. Like we'll have where you lose time off of your screen time too if
Yeah.
you're, so I'll count to five, and if I get to five before you, then it's 1 minute off your screen, right? But then sometimes my wife and I are like, well, how many minutes did you have and how many minutes? And we're trying to keep track of how many minutes they've lost and how many minutes they've gained, and it can be exhausting just coming up with a system that works well so that the kids are clear how it works and you're clear as parents how it works. But yeah, it can be
We've
super
never talked
motivating.
about this before, actually, though. I'm wondering, how do your kids react to losing screen time minutes?
Oh, yeah. So,
And there's a
and
reason why I asked this too. There's a reason why I
yeah,
asked this. I'll tell
yeah.
you after.
Okay, but like full disclosure, we've even done some like triple P parenting courses, and even though this is my line of work, it's still like we're looking for new information too and how to do this, and it is evolving. Um, But one of the things is like we'll take something away, but then we'll give them the opportunity to earn it back. So even if it's a toy, right? It's like, okay, we're putting this away for a while, but with like, some good pro-social, healthy, behavior, you can earn some back. So you know what? If you do this, this, and this, even though you lost 10 minutes, you could earn 5 minutes back,
Hmm.
right? And so there's an ongoing kind of like, hey, good behavior gets rewarded, bad behavior gets punished or gets negative consequences. And we always want to focus more on the rewards and like the reinforcement part of things naturally. But like I'll give you an example from this morning. My son is laying on the couch, doesn't want to eat his breakfast, is like not happy because his brother gets to pick the show that they're watching for breakfast, right? And so he doesn't like the show, so he's like, I'm not eating breakfast. So he's protesting. And then I go up to him and I'm like, hey, bud, like, the longer it takes you to come to the table and to eat your breakfast, you don't actually get your tablet before you're going to daycare, right? And your brother's going to get his because he's eating and he's going to be brushing his teeth, right? So, like heads up, these are the consequences of this behavior, right? These are kind of natural consequences in our home based on the system that we've set up. And so he still drug his feet and was not interested in coming to the table. But his brother was almost done. And it's like, hey, your brother's almost done. So he got to the table. He finished at the same time. He ate all his breakfast. We're happy. He got some nutrition before he left for the day. Right. But there's this ongoing kind of like, and still holding that relationship. Like, I still care about you. I still love you, even though I don't agree with like what you're doing right now, or I'm not happy with you deciding not to eat. So I don't know. I kind of lost my train on that one, but that was a real clear example this morning for screen time.
So the reason why I asked how they react when they get consequenced or they lose minutes, because I hear from so many parents, like once they hear that they've lost it for something that they've earned,
Hmm.
their children just completely shut down
Yeah.
or have a meltdown. And the reason for that oftentimes is because like if they are earning something and then it's taken away, it's like all that time and effort that I just used to earn something,
Hmm.
you just took it away.
Yeah.
And quote unquote, I hate you. And so
Yeah.
they're gonna give you a really hard time. That's why I wondered for your experience, what they do if they lose minutes or they lose something that they've earned.
Well, again, they have to understand the kind of rewards and the system that's in place. What are the
Yes.
rules? How does this work? So we actually have like a star chart. And on that star chart, they can't lose that. Whatever they've gained, whatever check marks they've gained, there's
Yep.
no losing it. Even if we're super frustrated and we want to take away everything because we're annoyed and frustrated as parents,
Yep.
those are the rules that we've set in place. But with screen time, like you said, it's a privilege. We've treated it as like a privilege or a treat, and there's no requirement to have that. So you can actually lose that depending on what you're doing as a,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I like the star chart system actually. I will use that with my families as well. But I always do caution families, like, don't take away
Hmm.
the stars or the check marks that they've earned.
Yeah.
Because if we put that into practice, what often happens is that children will say, well, fine, start taking it away. You know what? In fact, mom and dad, take it all away. Let's see
Hmm.
what happens then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
And
hear
then it's,
oftentimes from parents, it's like, we have nothing else to take away. It's like, yeah.
yeah, I don't think there's a parent out there that hasn't hit that bottom before where it was like, you lost your screens, you've lost this, you lost, like, you're grounded, and then there's nothing left to take away. And the child still is like, well,
I've
now
gone
what?
so far with working at the beginning with a family where they told me they've taken away like the bed, like the bed frame,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
The door
the
off the bedroom.
yeah,
Yeah.
the child is literally has only a mattress in the room. Not child, it was a teenager, but it was like they only have a mattress in their room, and they're like, "Yeah, take that away too. Let's see what happens." Right. So like taking away that's the big caution about like, constantly consequencing is eventually, hey, teenagers, children adapt to, and they say, you know what, take stuff away. I don't care. See what my attitude is towards that. Right?
Hmm.
So for me, it's much more easier to reward. But I think it also shows, many of us grew up with consequences, right? I know I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the phrase, my house, my rules kind of probably a lot of people could resonate with, right?
Yep.
And then, but I mean, as a teenager, I definitely did my own rebelling. And,
Yep.
then you look forward to like, well, I'm not going to live in this house anymore, right? Like, what if your child says, I'm going to run away? Then what else? Like, so I don't like that kind of race to the bottom. And it's like threats and intimidation and you want to maintain that relationship. And honestly, if it could be natural consequences, start there. Don't add these external kind of motivation consequences.
Yeah. I think speaking of screen time and summer, one of the things I also often suggest to parents is to have a communal area for screen time. Just so that in terms of safety, knowing what your children are watching, it's a good expectation, I think, to again model, so that we know that okay, we when we use screens, we're not hiding underneath our blankets. We're gonna, you can have headphones, but we're gonna use it in a communal area where, as parents, you can sort of keep an eye on what they're watching. Again, this is very developmental age. If you have a teenager, yeah, there's something to be said about privacy. But if we're talking about young children, it's not a bad idea to have a communal area like the dining table or the kitchen where if they're going to watch something, they're going to do it with you or in front of you. So from time to time, you can check in.
For sure. And I think a lot of our focus naturally because our kids are younger, it's been on that. But, for teenagers, the rules are different
Hmm.
and the expectations can be different and the impact of social media, right, on children or on teenagers. There's a lot of research on this in terms of how negative it can be for their own body image, for, their own mood. So, the older the child gets, it's a lot more monitoring and involvement in terms of what kind of screen use they're using, like you said, where they're using it, how much privacy they have or don't have, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot more parental controls now that are available. Parents just don't even know exist, right?
Yeah. So depending on sort of your parenting philosophy as well as the age group that you have at home, we have to adapt as caregivers, right? So at some age, at some point, perhaps around 13, 14, it's like, okay, how do we set these rules differently now? Do we still have sort of a communal room for screen time? Do we still set time limits on screen time? And really communicating that to the teenager or the budding teenager that you have, right? And again, they may not love your rules or expectations, but it is important to structure it together. And to our point earlier, seeing them in the middle, letting them have some perceived control over it. But at the end of the day, you as a caregiver are in control and you know it. You don't have to share that.
Well, yeah, we have a phrase here at the office that, happens quite a bit because especially working with parents that are separated or divorced, children have a voice, not a choice, right? So we want to give them the voice. We want to hear, we want to like, they can even influence things. But at the end of the day, like the parent or the adult or the whoever's in charge needs to make a decision.
Yes.
And children will actually be reassured by that, right? When they understand who's making the decision, how it's being made, that can be comforting, right? They're not caught in the middle. They're not the ones deciding things. So I like that voice, not a choice. And it reminds me that like, oh, at the end of the day, like my wife and I, we have to make some decisions and have to communicate those in a way that our children can understand.
Yeah, that's going to be our weekend actually, trying to figure out because next week they're not in any camps. So it's figuring it out. Okay, what can they do around the house? What they can they help out with? We've got a bench in the front of the house on the porch that can be repainted. And do I really care how they paint it? Not really.
Mhm.
As long as they are helping out around the house, not going straight to the screen when they wake up every day, I'm okay with that. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, my message to all the caregivers out there is to find a routine and a structure over the summer that works for you. If you are working from home, working part-time, is it the end of the world if you give your child or children screen time? I don't think so. As long as it's not like, the 6 hours straight where you are working full-time from home and that does become an issue. For example, pediatricians often will recommend, up to age 5, less than an hour of screen time a day. But let's say you do have a 4 or 5 year old and you are working a couple of hours in the day. Is it the end of the world if you give them a couple of hours? To me, as a child psychologist, I'm gonna say no, right? You as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself too. You have to take care of your family by working, right?
Yeah, I mean, are your kids going to get diabetes because they ate, a lot of sugar on a weekend? No, right?
Yeah,
But just recognizing that, sugar generally is not that great.
yeah,
And so how do we limit it? How do we encourage children to eat other things? So doing other activities other than screen time, which like you said is highly engaging. It's
yeah,
it's it's designed to keep
yeah,
children engaged and adults, right?
yeah.
Like,
And if you have an older child or a teenager, talk to them about the schedule beforehand. Let them know, hey, I need to work from 9 to 11 tomorrow, so this is what you're going to do, right? You're going to help me water the plants. You're going to help me, unload the dishwasher, right? You're going to help me fold the laundry from last night that I did. And, you're going to do a little bit of reading or math for me or whatever it is, right? Before
yeah,
you get on that screen. And I'm going to check on you afterwards to see if you did it. Right. So again, it's structuring and getting into routine is so important.
absolutely. And oh man, I was just thinking, and parents need to take care of themselves, right? So sometimes my wife and I'll look at each other and it's a Saturday and it's been a long day and we've been doing a lot with the kids and we're like, maybe let's throw on a movie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we get to decompress a little bit and
Yep.
we could reset while the kids are engaged in watching TV, right?
Yep.
Like, so it might not be great for them to be watching that 2 hour show, but it's great for us. So, that needs to be factored in terms of like how the family is doing.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm just even thinking of my own experience. I probably watch way more screens than I should have growing up.
Yeah. And it didn't rot your brain.
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? It is like, okay, research has been going on for years, and the TV has been around for years. I'm not going to talk about cell phones and tablets, but just even the TV. It'd be so interesting to go back to see if anyone was doing research on the amount of TV time and child development back in, I don't know, the 80s and 90s. Because there's been so much research now on how screen time impacts the developing brain. But screens is not necessarily new. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's hard to measure these things, and these guidelines come out, even like safe drinking guidelines, they've been adjusted. They change with research. So we're going to learn more about the impacts of these things, but be conscious, be intentional,
Yep.
right? Be thoughtful, talk to people, figure out what other parents are doing, look at the guidelines from the pediatrics associations, and right, like gather some information
Yep.
if you're not overly burnt out or tired or exhausted, right? But there's a lot of great information out there. And I think we say this with almost every podcast. Like there's a lot out there. Hopefully, this kind of gets you interested in this topic and points
Hmm.
you in a direction to gather more information and make, possibly better decisions for yourself and your family.
Yeah. And set limits, set structures so that you're not caught off guard, your children aren't caught off guard. If they want the screen and at home they usually have access to it, and suddenly you say no and they go, "Well, what?" Right? And they flip out on you. Oftentimes that will mean like, okay, maybe we do need to set some limits here. Maybe we do need to set some structure and times when it is screen time and times when it's not.
Yeah, and those are opportunities, right? Those
Yep.
are opportunities for learning. It's like, how do kids learn how to deal with those big feelings?
Yep.
When they were in the middle of something and now they have to stop and do something else, those transitions. And how do we help support them and guide them without us flipping our lid and us having a huge emotional reaction, right? It's like, can we stay calm in those moments and support them to deal with this hard thing that we all have to learn?
Exactly. So that's my takeaway today, and it's something that I do preach to families. Set limits, set structures. It's okay for kids to be bored. Sometimes that's when the most creative things come out. And yeah, be in control and provide that perceived control to kids.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a takeaway today. I think just good luck. This is not an easy subject. And there's a lot of mixed kind of information out there. So figure out what works best for you and your family. And again, the bar for like the good enough parent or the good enough caregiver is not as high as often we get from reading books or reading things online in terms of being better parents or better caregivers. So
Yeah.
give yourself a break and be intentional and thoughtful.
Think of this episode as a brainstorming episode. It's not going to work for everyone, but hopefully we've given enough tidbits, ideas that perhaps we can all try in our households.
And it is just this is like a couple psychologists getting together talking about screen time, right? These are the common struggles that we have and the different opinions that we might have. So just kind of letting you on the inside in that yeah. And I think you were going to say, if you like this, click subscribe, click like, or whatever you need to
Follow.
do. Yeah, follow, click the buttons that might help us spread the word. And if you found this helpful, then maybe someone else might find it helpful. And it's a free resource. So thanks.
You said it better than I could. Take good care, everyone.
Take good care.